Welcome back to NHK Newsline. I'm Kaneko Sakno. We begin with some breaking news from Japan. More than 2 decades after Tokyo's deadly sarin gas attack, the former leader of the Doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo and 6 of his former disciples have been executed. Shoko Asahara, whose real name was Chizuo Matsumoto, had been on death row for more than a decade after being convicted of murder and other crimes. He was 63 years old. 12 other cult members of Aum Shinrikyo were also sentenced to death for their involvement in a series of crimes that left 29 people dead. That includes the release of sarin gas on Tokyo subway trains in March of 1995. The attack alone killed 13 people and injured more than 6,000. Out of the 12, half were also executed. We'll give you a brief rundown on who they were. Tomomasa Nakagawa was a personal doctor and close aide to Matsumoto. Nakagawa was held responsible for the deaths of 25 people in 11 different incidents. Kiyohide Hayakawa was also a close aide to the leader. He helped expand the cult's membership worldwide. Hayakawa was involved in the murder of a lawyer who was critical of the group. Yoshihiro Inoue joined the cult as a high school student. He played a role in attacks using nerve agents Sarin and VX. Tomomitsu Nimi was held responsible for killing a total of 26 people in 11 different incidents. Masamitsu Chiya was central to the cult's development of chemical weapons, including sarin and VX nerve agents. Seiichi Endo produced the sarin that was used in the subway attack. He was also involved in another deadly sarin gas attack in central Japan in 1994. It marks the first time members of the cult have been executed. Japan's Justice Ministry will be providing an update later on Friday. Let's take a look back at the history of the cult.
Matsumoto started Aum Shinrikyo as a yoga school in 1984. It was officially registered as a religious organization in 1989. Matsumoto claimed he had supernatural powers and could float in the air. Membership spiked, attracting thousands, including well-educated young people wanting mystical experiences. At its peak, there were more than 11,000 followers in Japan and many more worldwide. It didn't take long before there were red flags. Families of members tried to convince their loved ones to leave the cult. They were worried relatives were being brainwashed and forced to turn over money and property to become full-time live-in members. In 1989 came a suspicious disappearance. Lawyer Tsutsumi Sakamoto, who had been helping families of cult members, went missing along with his family. An Aum Shinrikyo badge was found at their home.
坂本弁護士のことは関係ないでしょ。ね、あなた方調べもしないでやってるわけでしょ。じゃあ証拠を出しなさい、証拠を。
In 1990, Matsumoto and other Aum members ran for the Diet, but were crushed at the ballot boxes. Matsumoto then started to arm what had become a Doomsday cult. He told members they needed to survive the approaching Armageddon, and ordered them to build up an arsenal of weapons and make deadly nerve agents like sarin and VX. They used sarin gas in a residential part of Matsumoto City in 1994. 8 people died and over 140 were injured. The following year, members abducted a man who was trying to get his sister to leave the cult. The fingerprint of an Aum follower was detected in a vehicle used to abduct the man. He died while in confinement. By 1995, police were closing in on the group, and in an attempt to upend an investigation into their activities, Aum Shinrikyo launched a terror attack on Tokyo. Members released sarin gas at several locations in the subway system during morning rush hour. It was the world's first indiscriminate chemical terror attack. In a country with a reputation of being a safe place to live, it left people in a state of shock and fear. 2 days after the attack, police stormed the cult's compound in central Japan and other facilities across the country. A massive investigation led to the indictment of about 200 people on a slew of charges, including carrying out both gas attacks and the killing of Sakamoto and his family. But some suspects fled and spent more than a decade on the run before being apprehended. Matsumoto was arrested after 2 months. He was found hiding in a secret room in a building owned by the cult. The leader and 12 of his followers were sentenced to death. The series of trials continued until January this year. In court, Matsumoto denied the involvement. He later stopped testifying and has never explained the motivation behind the attacks. The arrest did not stop Shinriko's splinter groups from operating. They have about 1,650 members.
For more on this story, we go live to NHK World's Jun Yotsumoto. She's standing by at the detention center where Matsumoto was executed. Jun, what can you tell us?
So a few hours ago, about half a dozen representatives from the public prosecutor's office walked into that facility behind me. Sources tell us they witnessed the execution of Chizuo Matsumoto. There have been questions for years about his mental state, including if he was fit to stand trial in the first place. He repeatedly made incomprehensible statements in court before being sentenced to death in 2006. And in the years since then, we understand that he has not been able to communicate with others. He has also refused to meet with his family or lawyers, although it sounds like he was still eating and exercising. Matsumoto has never explained the motivation behind the unprecedented attacks. So, while his death marks an ending in one sense, for many, a lot of questions still remain.
Thanks, Jun. Now, the wife of one of Asahara's victims has given her reaction to the execution. Shizue Takahashi lost her husband in the subway attack. She now represents an all victims support group. Takahashi says all she can feel is that this moment has finally arrived, but she says it would have been better if the execution had taken place while her parents and her parents-in-law were still alive. NHK World's executive producer Shogo Takahashi joins us now. So, Shogo, you were a reporter back then and went to the subway that day. Yes. What was it like?
Yes, I was heading for the Tsukiji market on a beautiful spring day to cover another story when the subway stopped abruptly. I got off and heard the station attendant explaining that a bomb may have been planted in one of the trains running ahead. I took a taxi to the market and saw a number of fire engines and ambulances surging past the cab. When I arrived, a breaking news report was saying that attacks using white powder took place at multiple subway stations. So I headed back to Tsukiji subway station, but police officers and firefighters on the scene told me not to go below. They said many passengers had stumbled out of subway cars after arriving at the station, and that some people were unconscious. Roads were blocked in the wide area from Tsukiji to Ginza, and chemical corps of the self-defense forces drove up to the station. They put on gas masks and went down to the subway station carrying tanks for decontaminating the sarin nerve gas. I was joined by another reporter and went to work covering the disaster.
And how did the attack affect Japan? Did it bring about any changes?
Yes, following the Sarin attack, it spurred rumors and speculation that more attacks were coming, spreading fear across the country. Unknown back then was how right those fears were. It would later be revealed that the cult had plans for a cyanide attack in one of Tokyo's biggest subway stations, Shinjuku. Luckily, those plans were foiled. But the whole thing cast doubt on the ability of the country's police force. The Sarin attacks showed the police were not able to respond to the kind of terrorist threat. They were ill-equipped and unprepared. They also didn't realize the type of radicalization that was going on with the cult. Since then, the National Police Agency has worked to step up its capabilities for investigating and preventing terror attacks by these kind of groups. Change was brought in based on lessons learned from the Sarin attack.
And what stood out for you during the trials?
It was striking to hear for several years on end members say with deep remorse that they didn't join the cult to commit murders. The constant theme is that they were brainwashed by the cult leader and, in quote, away from his control, were devastated by what they had done. I remember one cult member was talking about how 2 subway employees died while trying to remove bags of sarin from a train car. He burst into tears over what he had done and how he had listened to the orders of Matsumoto. The widow of one of the subway workers started to cry as well. The only noise in the courtroom was the sobbing of the cult member and the widow. It was intensely emotional thing I will never forget.
Now, the cult still exists in the form of splinter groups. How is that? And are they considered a threat to Japan?
Yes, 2 splinter groups use other names than own cult. They are under surveillance and must report their assets and, if necessary, accept on-site inspections. Concern is spreading among residents around the group's facilities. What we must learn from the cult's crime is this. The group was nothing unusual when it started, but its highly educated young members got under the influence of mind control and stopped thinking for themselves and committed crimes to follow the cult's orders. It's something I think that must not be forgotten in Japan. How easy it was for seemingly normal, bright people to go down a path to terrorism.
Thanks for that, Shogo.